The gunshot that killed Willow Warren's husband echoed through the Montana territory for months after his burial, though only she could hear it. Standing at her husband's grave on a crisp October morning in 1876, Willow pulled her shawl tighter against the wind that swept across the rolling plains surrounding the small frontier settlement of Pine Creek. "You should come inside, Mrs. Warren." "Storm's brewing," said Pastor Mills, his weathered face creased with concern. "Just a moment longer," Willow replied, her voice barely audible against the rustling of the cottonwood trees. At 32, Willow had not expected to be a widow. 4 months had passed since outlaws had raided their homestead, killing Thomas as he defended their small farm. Their 6 years of marriage, built on dreams of prosperity in the West, had ended in blood and ashes. Pine Creek wasn't much of a town, a general store, saloon, church, and scattered houses, but it was all Willow had left. The farm had been too much for her to maintain alone, so she'd sold it to pay her husband's debts and took a room above the general store, where she now worked for Mr. Jenkins, the proprietor. As she turned to leave the cemetery, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, matching her mood. Life continued in Pine Creek, but Willow moved through it like a ghost, existing but not living. The townsfolk were kind enough, offering help and sympathy, but nothing could fill the emptiness Thomas's death had left behind. The bell above the general store door jingled as Willow entered, shaking rain from her shawl. "There you are," Mr. Jenkins said, peering over his spectacles. "Was beginning to worry the storm caught you." "Nearly did," Willow replied, hanging her damp shawl on a peg. "I'll inventory the new shipment now. No rush, quiet day with this weather." Mr. Jenkins nodded toward the window where rain now pelted against the glass. "Though I reckon the saloon'll be full tonight." Willow nodded absently, her thoughts already on the ledgers and stock lists that would occupy her afternoon. Work was the only thing that dulled the ache in her heart, and she threw herself into it with single-minded determination. As predicted, the rain continued well into the evening, drumming against the roof of Willow's small room. She sat by her window, a half-stitched quilt in her lap, watching water stream down the glass. 4 months, and still she found herself listening for Thomas's footsteps on the stairs, his gentle knock at her door. Sleep came fitfully that night, as it had every night since Thomas died. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were filled with shadows and gunshots. Morning brought clear skies and the arrival of the monthly supply wagon from Helena. Willow was arranging preserves on a shelf when the door opened, bringing with it a gust of fresh air and the sound of spurs jingling against boot heels. "Morning," called a deep voice she didn't recognize. Willow turned to see a tall man filling the doorway, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the sunlight. He removed his hat as he stepped inside, revealing dark hair streaked with gray at the temples. Dust covered his clothes, suggesting a long journey. "Mr. Jenkins stepped out for a moment," Willow said. "Can I help you?" The stranger's eyes, the color of a summer sky, met hers. "Just need some supplies. Been on the trail a while." "We just received our monthly shipment," Willow gestured to the crates stacked near the counter. "What do you need?" As she helped the man gather supplies, coffee, flour, salt, ammunition, Willow caught him studying her when he thought she wasn't looking. There was something in his gaze that wasn't the usual pity she'd grown accustomed to from others. "You're new to Pine Creek," she observed, tallying his purchases in the ledger. "Just passing through," he replied. "Name's Gabriel Garrett. Most folks call me Gabe." "Willow Warren," she said, not offering her hand. "Where are you headed, Mr. Garrett?" "No particular destination. Been working cattle drives between Texas and Montana for years. Thought I might see what's north of here before winter sets in." Not much north but wilderness until you reach Canada, Willow said, wrapping his purchases in brown paper. Gabriel nodded, a slight smile crossing his weathered face. Wilderness suits me fine, madam. As he paid for his supplies, their fingers brushed, and Willow quickly withdrew her hand, surprised by the warmth that lingered on her skin. It had been months since she'd touched another person, and the simple contact sent an unexpected jolt through her. "There's a decent spot to camp by the creek, half-mile west of town," she said, busying herself with the cash box. "Water's clean there." "Obliged for the tip," Gabriel replied, gathering his parcels. He hesitated at the door. "Mrs. Warren, my condolences." Willow stiffened. "Word travels fast in small towns." "It does," he acknowledged. "Lost my wife to fever 3 years back in Colorado. I know words don't help much." Before Willow could respond, he was gone, the bell tinkling in his wake. She stood motionless behind the counter, unsettled by the encounter. It wasn't his knowledge of her situation that bothered her, as he'd said. Word traveled fast. It was the recognition in his eyes, the understanding that came only from similar pain. That evening, as Willow walked home from the store, she caught sight of a campfire flickering through the trees by the creek. The knowledge that Gabriel Garrett was out there, a stranger who'd shared a piece of his own grief with her, followed her up the stairs to her lonely room. 3 days passed. Gabriel Garrett remained camped by the creek, occasionally coming into town for supplies or a meal at the small cafe adjoining the saloon. Willow observed his comings and goings with an interest she didn't care to examine too closely. On the 4th day, disaster struck Pine Creek. A fire began in the livery stable, spreading quickly to neighboring buildings. The entire town turned out to fight the flames, forming a bucket brigade from the creek to the burning structures. Willow worked alongside the others, passing buckets with aching arms, her face streaked with soot. Through the smoke, she glimpsed Gabriel on a ladder against the church, dousing the roof with water to prevent the flames from catching the wooden shingles. By dawn, the fire was contained, but not before it had destroyed the livery, damaged the saloon, and left 3 families homeless. The town gathered in the church, which had been spared thanks to Gabriel's efforts. Pastor Mills offered prayers while the women distributed coffee and what food they could gather. "You're bleeding," a voice said behind Willow as she filled cups. She turned to find Gabriel standing there, his face blackened with smoke, a cut above his eye trickling blood down his cheek. Willow looked down at her hands, noticing for the first time the raw blisters across her palms from the rough bucket handles. "It's nothing," she said, but winced when he gently took her hand to examine it. "Burns need tending or they'll fester," Gabriel said. "Got any salve at the store?" Before she could answer, Mrs. Peterson called for help with her children, and Willow pulled her hand away. "I'll see to it later. There's work to be done now." The following days were a blur of activity as Pine Creek began rebuilding. Gabriel stayed, offering his strength and skills to the effort. Willow found herself working alongside him often, repairing the damaged buildings, distributing supplies from the store's reserves. A week after the fire, Willow was sorting through donations from neighboring settlements when Gabriel entered the store, carrying a small tin. "For your hands," he said, setting it on the counter. "Made it myself. Old Texas remedy beeswax, herbs, bear grease." Willow looked at the tin, then at her still healing palms. "Thank you, but I couldn't already made," he interrupted with a shrug, "going to waste otherwise." After he left, Willow opened the tin, inhaling the earthy scent of the salve. That night, she applied it to her hands, surprised at how quickly it soothed the lingering pain. 2 days later, a summer thunderstorm swept through Pine Creek, bringing much-needed rain but damaging the temporary roof on the saloon. Willow was caught in the downpour while delivering supplies to one of the families displaced by the fire. By the time she reached the store, she was soaked to the skin and shivering. Gabriel was there, helping Mr. Jenkins move merchandise away from a leaking section of ceiling. "Lord, Mrs. Warren, you'll catch your death," Mr. Jenkins exclaimed. "Go on upstairs and get dry." Teeth chattering, Willow nodded and headed for the back stairs. As she reached the landing, a wave of dizziness swept over her and she stumbled. Strong hands caught her before she fell. "Easy there," Gabriel said, steadying her. "You're freezing." "I'm fine," Willow protested, but her body betrayed her as another violent shiver ran through her. Gabriel ignored her objections, guiding her up the stairs to her room. "Where do you keep dry clothes?" he asked, his tone brooking no argument. Willow pointed weakly to the chest by her bed. "Top drawer." "Get those wet things off while I build up your fire," he ordered, turning his back to give her privacy. Too cold to argue, Willow changed into a dry nightgown and wrapped herself in the quilt from her bed while Gabriel coaxed the banked embers in her small stove back to life. "You need tea." "Hot food," he said, looking around the sparse room. "I'll fetch something from downstairs." "No need to fuss," Willow managed, but Gabriel was already heading for the door. He returned with a steaming cup of tea and a bowl of stew that Mrs. Jenkins had prepared for their supper. "Drink," he instructed, handing her the tea. "Then eat." Willow accepted the cup, wrapping her fingers around its warmth. "You're quite accustomed to giving orders, Mr. Garrett." A smile flickered across his face. "Habit from trail driving. Cattle don't respond well to polite requests." Despite herself, Willow felt a laugh bubble up. "Are you comparing me to a stubborn heifer, sir?" "More like a half-drowned cat," Gabriel replied, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Prickly but in need of looking after all the same." The unexpected humor broke something loose inside Willow. For the first time in months, she felt a genuine smile form. "I suppose I should thank you for not leaving me to drown in a puddle." Gabriel's expression softened. "No thanks needed, Mrs. Warren." After ensuring she'd eaten and was warming up, Gabriel bid her good night. Willow listened to his footsteps descending the stairs, an unfamiliar feeling stirring in her chest. Not happiness. She wasn't sure she remembered what that felt like, but perhaps a lessening of the constant grief that had been her companion since Thomas's death. The following morning, Willow woke with a slight fever but insisted on working anyway. Gabriel appeared at the store mid-morning, eyeing her with concern. "You should be resting," he said as she struggled to lift a crate of canned goods. "And who would do my work?" Willow countered, though her voice lacked its usual edge. "I would," Gabriel offered simply. "Until you're well." Willow stared at him, trying to understand his motives. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." Gabriel met her gaze steadily. "I know enough." Before she could respond, the door opened, admitting Sheriff Cole and two riders Willow didn't recognize. "Morning, folks," the sheriff said, nodding to Willow. "These men are looking for someone. Thought you might have seen him pass through." One of the strangers stepped forward, his badge catching the light. "U.S. Marshal Harding, madam, tracking a fugitive armed robber who hit a bank in Helena last month." Willow shook her head. "We don't get many strangers in Pine Creek, Marshal. Just Mr. Garrett here, who arrived last week." The marshal's eyes shifted to Gabriel, who stood motionless by the counter. "And your business here, Garrett?" "Just passing through," Gabriel replied evenly. "Been helping rebuild after the fire." The second visitor, a thin man with narrow eyes, studied Gabriel closely. "You look familiar." "Ever work up Deadwood Way?" "Can't say I have," Gabriel answered. "Been mostly Texas to Montana cattle trails past 10 years. The marshal seemed satisfied, but his companion continued to stare at Gabriel with suspicion. After a few more questions, they departed, promising to return if they learned anything new about their fugitive. As the door closed behind them, Willow noticed Gabriel's shoulders relax slightly. "You didn't care for their questions," she observed. Gabriel shrugged. "Most men who live on the trail have pasts they don't discuss with lawmen." "Should I be concerned?" Willow asked, surprising herself with the directness of the question. Gabriel met her eyes. "No, Mrs. Warren, I'm not running from the law. But you are running from something." A shadow crossed his face. "Aren't we all?" The conversation ended there, but Willow found herself pondering his words as the day progressed. By evening, her fever had worsened, and Mr. Jenkins insisted she go upstairs to rest. "Gabriel says he'll help tomorrow," the shopkeeper assured her. "You just focus on getting well." Willow didn't have the strength to argue. She spent the night tossing in feverish dreams, memories of Thomas mingling with images of fire and strange faces. She woke to find Mrs. Peterson sitting by her bed, a cool cloth in hand. "There you are," the older woman said kindly. "You've had us worried." "How long have I been asleep?" Willow asked, her throat painfully dry. "Nearly 2 days," Mrs. Peterson replied, helping her sip water. "That cowboy friend of yours has been checking on you regular, bringing herbs for tea." "He's not my friend," Willow protested weakly. "Barely know him." Mrs. Peterson just smiled. "He knows plenty about treating fever," said his wife taught him before she passed. When Gabriel visited later, bringing broth from the cafe, Willow was sitting up in bed, her fever broken but her body still weak. "Mrs. Peterson says I have you to thank for the herbal remedies," she said as he set the tray beside her bed. Gabriel nodded. "My wife was half Cherokee. Knew more about healing plants than any doctor." It was the first time he'd volunteered information about his past without being asked. Willow studied him as he moved around her small room, adding wood to the stove. "Tell me about her," Willow said softly, "if you don't mind." Gabriel stood still for a moment, his back to her. Then he sat in the chair Mrs. Peterson had vacated. "Her name was Sarah," he began. "Met her in Oklahoma Territory during the war. I was a scout for the Union Army, got separated from my unit and took a rebel bullet. She found me half dead in a creek bed, dragged me to her cabin and patched me up." As Gabriel spoke, Willow saw a different man emerge, one who had loved deeply and lost terribly, just as she had. He told her of his life with Sarah, their small ranch in Colorado, the fever that had taken her during a harsh winter when no doctor could reach them. "After she died, couldn't bear to stay there," he finished. "Sold the ranch, went back to what I knew, cattle, open country." "And you've been wandering ever since," Willow said, understanding in her voice. Gabriel's eyes met hers. "Until now." The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Willow recovered slowly, and true to his word, Gabriel helped at the store while she regained her strength. Working together, they fell into an easy routine. Willow found herself looking forward to his quiet presence, his dry humor, the way he seemed to anticipate her needs before she voiced them. One evening, as they were closing the store, Gabriel asked, "Feel up to a short ride tomorrow? It's your day off, and there's something I'd like to show you." Willow hesitated. She hadn't been on a horse since Thomas died, hadn't ventured beyond the boundaries of Pine Creek. "It's not far," Gabriel assured her, seeming to sense her reluctance. "And the fresh air would do you good." "All right," Willow agreed, surprising herself. "Tomorrow morning." Gabriel arrived at dawn with 2 horses, one a gentle mare he'd borrowed from a grateful farmer whose barn he'd helped rebuild. They rode west of town, following the creek into the rolling hills beyond. The September morning was cool but bright, the landscape painted with the first blush of autumn colors. They stopped atop a ridge overlooking a small valley, where a crystal-clear lake reflected the sky. Wildflowers still bloomed along its shores, and a pair of deer drank at the water's edge. "It's beautiful," Willow breathed, dismounting to stand at the edge of the ridge. "Found it hunting last week," Gabriel said, joining her. "Reminded me of a place Sarah and I used to visit in Colorado." Willow glanced at him. "You still miss her?" "Every day," he confirmed, "but differently now. Time changes grief, shapes it into something you can carry." They settled on a blanket Gabriel had brought, sharing a simple meal of bread, cheese, and apples. Willow found herself relaxing, the tight band of sorrow that had constricted her heart for months loosening slightly in this peaceful place. "Tell me about Thomas," Gabriel said as they watched an eagle circle above the lake. Willow was silent for so long that Gabriel began to apologize for asking, but she shook her head. "No, it's all right. It's just, no one asks about him anymore. They avoid mentioning his name as if speaking it might shatter me." Slowly, haltingly at first, then with growing ease, Willow shared her story. How she'd met Thomas, a school teacher from Boston, when he'd come west seeking adventure and opportunity. Their courtship, marriage, the dream of building a life on the Montana frontier. The hard work, the joys, the disappointments. "He wasn't a natural farmer," Willow said with a sad smile. "His hands were made for books, not plows, but he tried so hard for my sake." "You loved him very much," Gabriel observed. "I did," Willow agreed. "We were happy, despite the struggles." She fell silent, the familiar pain washing over her as she remembered that final day. Gabriel waited patiently, giving her space to continue or not, as she chose. "They came for our horses," Willow finally said, her voice hollow. "3 men, armed. Thomas tried to reason with them. He always believed people were fundamentally good, that violence was a failure of communication." Gabriel's hand found hers on the blanket, a gentle anchor as she continued. "They shot him, just like that. No warning, no chance. They took our horses, our supplies, even my mother's locket, and as he lay dying in my arms, all I could think was how wrong he'd been about people." Tears she'd held back for months finally spilled down Willow's cheeks. Gabriel's arm went around her shoulders and she leaned into his strength, allowing herself to weep for all she had lost. "I'm sorry," she said when the storm of grief had passed, embarrassed by her breakdown. "Don't be," Gabriel said gently. "Tears are honest, we need them sometimes." As they rode back to town later, Willow felt different, not healed, but perhaps beginning to heal. The sharing of her pain had somehow made it lighter, more bearable. At the edge of town, Gabriel reined his horse to a stop. "Thank you for coming today," he said, "and for trusting me with your story." Willow met his gaze, seeing in his eyes a reflection of her own journey through grief. "Thank you for listening." That night, in the quiet of her room, Willow realized something had shifted inside her. The memory of Thomas remained, precious and painful, but it no longer consumed her entirely. There was space now for other feelings, other possibilities. The following week brought change to Pine Creek. The marshal returned, this time with news that they'd captured their fugitive near the Canadian border. The rebuilding of the livery was completed, and the town began preparing for winter. Gabriel continued to help around town, but Willow sensed his restlessness growing as the days shortened. The drifter in him was emerging again, called by distant horizons. They were walking back from church one crisp Sunday when Gabriel said, "Been thinking of moving on soon. Winter's coming." Though she'd been expecting it, the words still stung. Willow nodded, keeping her eyes on the path ahead. "Where will you go?" "Was considering California," Gabriel replied, studying her profile. "Heard the winters are milder there." "I'm sure they are," Willow said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "It sounds lovely." They walked in silence for a while, the unspoken hanging between them. "Willow," Gabriel finally said, stopping and turning to face her. "I could stay if there was a reason." Her heart quickened at his use of her given name, at the question in his eyes. "What reason would that be, Mr. Garrett?" "You know what reason," he said softly. Willow looked away, conflict tearing at her. Part of her wanted to ask him to stay, to explore the connection that had grown between them. Another part recoiled in fear and guilt. How could she contemplate such feelings when Thomas was barely cold in his grave? "I can't," she whispered. "It's too soon. I'm not ready." Gabriel nodded, disappointment clear in his face, but acceptance too. "I understand." That night, Willow couldn't sleep. Images of Thomas and Gabriel alternated in her mind, past and potential future colliding. Near dawn, she rose and went to the window, staring out at the stars fading from the sky. What would Thomas want for her? The question had never occurred to her before. As she considered it now, she remembered his voice, his laugh, his boundless optimism. Thomas had loved life, had wanted her to be happy. With sudden clarity, Willow realized that allowing herself to live fully again would honor Thomas's memory more than endless mourning ever could. When she arrived at the store that morning, Gabriel was loading supplies into saddlebags, his horse tethered outside. Mr. Jenkins gave her a sympathetic look as she entered. "Morning, Mrs. Warren," Gabriel said formally. "Just settling my account before heading out." "So soon?" Willow asked, her carefully prepared words deserting her. "No point in delaying," Gabriel replied, not meeting her eyes. "Trail west should be clear for another few weeks." Mr. Jenkins cleared his throat. "Think I'll check on those shipments in the back," he said, tactfully leaving them alone. As soon as they were alone, Willow spoke. "I couldn't sleep last night." Gabriel looked up, really seeing her for the first time that morning. "Neither could I. I've been thinking," Willow continued, moving closer to the counter that separated them. "About what you said, about having a reason to stay." Hope flickered in Gabriel's eyes, but he remained cautious. "And when Thomas died," Willow said slowly, "I felt like all the light went out of my world. I've been living in darkness for months, just going through motions, not really living at all." Gabriel remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "But lately, because of you, I've started to see glimpses of light again." Willow's voice broke slightly. "He took my light when he died, Gabriel." Gabriel reached across the counter, taking her hand in his. "Then let me lend you mine tonight," he said softly. "And tomorrow night, and for as many nights as you'll have me." Tears sprang to Willow's eyes, but they weren't tears of grief. "Are you certain? I'm still healing. I can't promise I won't have dark days." "I'm certain," Gabriel said firmly. "I've been wandering since Sarah died, looking for something I couldn't name. I found it here with you." 2 days later, Gabriel moved his few possessions into a small cabin at the edge of town, which the grateful owner of the rebuilt livery offered at minimal rent. Though Willow maintained her room above the store, she and Gabriel began courting properly, under the approving eyes of the Pine Creek community. As autumn deepened into winter, their relationship grew. They shared meals, stories, quiet evenings by the fire. Gabriel taught Willow to track and hunt. She taught him to bake bread and mend clothing. Together, they created new traditions while honoring the memories of those they had loved before. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside, Gabriel asked Willow to be his wife. "Are you sure?" she asked, searching his face in the firelight. "I don't want you to feel trapped here because of me." Gabriel took her hands in his. "Home isn't a place, Willow, it's a feeling. You're my home now." They were married on New Year's Day, 1877, in Pine Creek's small church. The entire town attended, celebrating not just a union but a rebirth, two people who had lost everything finding the courage to begin again. That night, as they lay together in Gabriel's cabin, "Now they're home," Willow whispered. Thank you for lending me your light." Gabriel kissed her gently. "It's our light now." Spring came early to the Montana Territory that year. The hills turned green, wildflowers bloomed, and Pine Creek prospered. Gabriel took a job managing the rebuilt livery, while Willow continued working at the store, now as a partner rather than an employee. In late April, as they picnicked by the lake Gabriel had shown her the previous autumn, Willow shared news that brought tears of joy to her husband's eyes. They were expecting a child. "Life finds a way to continue," Gabriel said, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Even after the darkest nights." "It does," Willow agreed, leaning against his shoulder. "And sometimes, if we're very fortunate, we find someone to share the journey." As they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Willow thought of Thomas and Sarah, the loves they had lost, but would always carry in their hearts. There would always be a place for them in memory, but the future bright and full of promise belonged to the family she and Gabriel were building together. The light that had once been extinguished now burned steadily, illuminating a path forward neither of them had expected to find. In the wild frontier of Montana, among the struggles and joys of pioneer life, they had discovered the greatest treasure of all: the courage to love again.